Jones Dairy Farm is a seventh-generation family-owned and operated company located in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. For more than 135 years, Jones has been using real, natural ingredients, original recipes, and time-honored traditions to create distinctive and timeless products. Jones is known for producing premium, all-natural breakfast sausage, naturally smoked hams and Canadian bacon, all-natural meatballs, and dry-aged bacon. All certified gluten-free. Want to get in on some of the magic and fun of the season? There are only a few nights left to experience the zoo after hours under the glow of over 1 million lights. Yes, I'm talking about Zoo Lights at Henry Vilas Zoo. It's $12 for single tickets or 4 for $40, and kids under 3 are free. Runs from now until December 23rd. Don't miss this year's Zoo Lights. Start a special holiday tradition with your family. Get tickets today at henryvilaszoo.gov/lights. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, it's been almost 1 year to the day since tragedy struck in Madison. Fair warning, if you're around young ears right now, you might want to pick this episode up at a later time. The mass shooting at Abundant Life Christian School on the east side of Madison killed a student and a teacher and left several others injured. The incident also left the shooter dead, and the ripple effects are still being felt in our city today. With me today to talk about it are two Cap Times reporters, a familiar voice on the show, Erin McGroarty. Erin, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And a new voice on CityCast Madison, K-12 education reporter, Erin Gretzinger. Erin, welcome to CityCast Madison.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I know this is a somber topic, and we're really grateful that you are making the time for us. To understand how we move forward, we have to get a better picture of where we're coming from and what happened. Some people might have missed the details. We're just going to briefly get from you, Erin McGroarty. You were a part of the reporting team who covered the shooting for the Cap Times when it happened. Can you take us back to that day and how the events unfolded?
Yeah. I mean, I think we were all very shocked to hear what was happening. I think as a journalist, you prepare for things like this, but it's just different when it happens. So it was sort of an all hands on deck situation. I was back at the office. Our former colleague, Andrew Ball, was back here as well. And then we had Danielle Duclos, who's our investigative reporter, on scene hearing from law enforcement. And we had our photo director, Ruthie Hauge, was there as well. So it was a big collective effort, and Danielle was sort of feeding information back to the office, and Andrew and I were piecing it together and sort of putting together all of the verified information that we had at the time. But of course, as the investigation continued, that information, some of it changed, and we learned a lot more about, the motives, and that investigation is still ongoing. So, things are not solidified, but that was a big group effort that day.
Yeah, I mean, the news broke. I know there were press conferences that followed, and then even the community rallied for support around the Capitol. Like, a lot happened that day. And I know that we were leaning on other news outlets that had people on the ground, like the Cap Times. And so we thought, what are you guys, are you thinking about this a year later? And you obviously were, because you've put out a series of stories about the aftermath of the ALCS shooting. And a recent story from you both, highlights online extremism and school safety on the internet that had such a big role in what happened. Erin Gretzinger, what is the role that the internet played in this story?
So what we found in our reporting, and why we really wanted to follow up on this, is that in the Abundant Life shooting, we knew that online activity and these extremism and dark spaces were part of the shooter's life and, how it played into that day. So we felt as a newsroom that this was one area where we could take a step back and really look at how are school officials, how are state officials thinking about online extremism, and what sort of proactive measures are these agencies taking to be thinking about, online safety, where that intersects with mental health, what kind of screenings, curriculum. These were all the questions on our minds about how can we think about 1 year later after the shooting and some of those things that officials on the ground were already doing and maybe doing even more after the shooting.
Can you share some of the details about the shooter and her activity online? You don't have to go into super depths, but basically it was found out that she had spent time kind of in hateful spaces and white supremacist spaces, and how that kind of impacted what happened.
So as we all know, on December 16th last year, the shooter was a 15-year-old student at Abundant Life. And sort of in the aftermath of that shooting, it became clearer through, court records, through some independent research and some other news reports that she had struggled with mental health for years and, again, was really immersed in these online dark spaces, as you mentioned, with white supremacy, as well as spaces that were glorifying guns, violence, and school shootings in general. It was also mentioned in the criminal complaint specifically that brought felony charges against her father, that Madison police had notified her father in the summer of 2022, so several years ago, that his daughter was engaging in, quote, high risk, quote, online behavior. So we knew those details, and they came out sort of in this piecemeal way after the events. And again, just sort of painted a picture. And we know from broader research that this is a phenomenon among other school shooters in particular to be involved in these spaces, and the vulnerability of youth who are feeling, isolated or disconnected or struggling in other ways to potentially find those spaces and fall into them.
Yeah, I just can't even imagine what it's like to be a kid in these day and age, like an online, and to find extremist online channels if you're feeling isolated, if you're not fitting in. Like, there are real risks. And reading your story, I mean, it seems so straightforward. Of course there are risks online, but it really painted a picture in a way. I was like, oh, this really needs a lot of support and digging into digital literacy and the spaces that, can be quite dangerous. It feels like a bit of a catch-22, because your reporting talks about how many students who are bullied at school or don't feel a sense of belonging find community online. It is just the way of the world these days. And we know that there are plenty of great communities online, but of course not all of them. So how were the experts talking about, what parents can do, students and teachers, in terms of navigating such a blurry domain? Erin McGroarty, I know that you were also a reporter on this story.
Yeah, so I connected with some state officials, both in the Office of Children's Mental Health as well as the Office of School Safety. And what they said is that, it does fall on teachers and on family members and on parents to have open and honest conversations with young people about how they're feeling as well as their online behavior. And what Linda Hall, who's the director of the Office of Children's Mental Health, said is that, as you mentioned, children who are experiencing bullying or who don't feel a sense of belonging can turn to online spaces to find that connection. And so having sort of an open dialogue with educators or with parents about the type of online activity that young people are participating in, how they're feeling, can sort of keep the communication channels open and prevent things from escalating into those dark spaces that we don't want young people falling into.
Mm-hmm. And Erin Gretzinger, when it comes to online safety in Madison schools specifically, what tools are in place for the district to use, and what does it look like in practice?
We found through our reporting that there's a bunch of different ways that Madison schools receive potential tips about school safety. But the most common way on a day-to-day basis that officials are monitoring potential tips and threats is actually through this third-party platform called Securely, which is actually monitoring students' online activity on district-owned devices or district accounts. So that in and of itself, I think, is pretty indicative of what sort of things are happening in these spaces and how students, on an everyday basis, might be going through something that is a flag or of a concern to the school. And what school officials told us is that most of those tips don't reach the level of like an actual threat. The difference between posing a threat and actually being one, sort of trying to navigate that and what students, if they were actually intending to do something. And of course, most of the time they're like, that's not the case. But they really emphasize that follow-up, even in those cases where they determine there's not a threat, is still super important because it could be signaling something early on. And that Madison officials were really adamant, early intervention's key, making sure a human steps in when they're finding these things to really determine what steps can be taken to help that student.
Yeah, and can you tell me about the state-run program Speak Up, Speak Out? Because reading about that was it felt revelatory to me. Like, oh, good. It was just really something important in this realm.
So the Office of School Safety, which is housed under the Department of Justice, runs this statewide school safety tip line. And students or teachers or other folks at public and private schools, because it is a state-run tip line, it's not specific to any one district, can reach out to this tip line that is run 24 hours a day, and it's staffed by 9 monitors who respond in real time to the information that is being provided. So if that includes, a young person who, for example, is experiencing bullying, part of that response is going to be validating that young person's concerns, letting them know that someone is listening to them, trying to make that human connection and make sure that that student feels heard and feels supported before those feelings might turn into resentment towards that school space. And as we were doing this reporting and connecting with this office, that also coincided with the timing of when they released their impact report for last school year. And what it found was that tips to the school safety line increased by more than 30% last school year as compared to the school year before that. And they said that it sort of represents multiple things. Obviously, you don't want tips coming in because that means that people don't feel good at school. But at the same time, it is indicative of a healthy reporting culture. And so if something is going wrong, they want students to feel like they have the right tools to, connect with officials and make sure that those threats are responded to. And the folks that staff this line work with the schools, they work with the school districts. In serious cases, they connect with law enforcement. So it's really this sort of umbrella that students and other young people can give information to, and then those officials can make sure that that information gets into the right hands to make sure that something doesn't happen.
It really sounds like a lifeline, the state program. And also one of the things that struck me was just like how many people that they're training. This is something that feels like a real infrastructure to be of a support across the entire state. And that, I don't know, I felt heartened by that.
During the 2024-2025 school year, the office trained 1,170 people from 123 different school districts and private schools.
Juicy, flavorful, and easy. That's what you'll get with Jones Dairy Farm all-natural pork sausage. Their breakfast sausage is so unbelievably good, you'll need to stock up your freezer. Available in both links and patties, and even bulk bags that can be found at your Costco in their no antibiotics ever variety. It's free from top 9 allergens, preservatives, nitrates, and additives. They're fully cooked, making feeding you or your family easy and delicious. And now they're available in resealable bags. Jones, making breakfast better since 1889. Root to Rise helps Dane County high school students, especially those who haven't yet found joy in their education, get on a stronger path by supporting younger children in elementary classrooms across Dane County. Each day, they sit beside kids during reading and math, answering questions, offering encouragement, and building the kind of trusting connection children naturally respond to. Teachers notice it right away. They call these teens, quote, extra hands, extra voices, and extra leaders, and say classrooms feel more productive with them there. And for many students, this becomes a turning point. As one shared, Root to Rise changed my life. When I started, I didn't care about school and didn't think I'd graduate, but working with younger kids changed everything. I got more confident and I wanted to do better for them and for myself. If you believe in giving young people a strong path forward, please consider supporting Root to Rise's work. Go to roottorise.org. That's root, the number 2, rise.org. Hey you! If you're currently writing the gift-giving struggle bus, I want to put you on some game. Aura Frames, the award-winning digital picture frame, is an answer to every holiday gifting moment. I mean it! Giving an Aura frame can make holiday shopping so much easier for you. I gifted their Carver matte frame to my aunt, the photographer in my family, who's known for her thoughtful gifts and keeping extended family close. She lit up, and that Aura frame now lights up her office with family memories. With Aura Frames, you get unlimited free photo and video uploads, and you can even preload photos on it before it ships. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code CityCast at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code CityCast. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. And support this show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. You know, I do want to pivot and say, of course, schools and educators are at the forefront of this story, but behind the scenes, another group in our community was also devastated by this incident, and that's doctors, particularly emergency doctors. Erin, McGroarty, one of your recent stories in this series, highlighted the work of first responders and UW health doctors who responded to this shooting. Can you share a bit about what they said around how this tragedy has impacted them and their work?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to be able to spend close to an hour with 3 different doctors at the UW health system who responded that day to varying degrees. There was an emergency doctor who trains first responders, Dr. Megan Gussick. She, works with EMS and firefighters and police and trains them in how to apply emergency medicine in the field. And something that she told me that really stuck with me is that you never want a tragedy like this to happen, but the lives that were saved showed that the training had paid off. And that the police who entered the school first, before paramedics were even allowed in, were the ones who were triaging patients and stopping, gunshot wounds from hemorrhaging. And that immediate response in the moment is what probably saved a lot of lives before doctors were even able to get their hands on these students. And then I also connected with Dr. Adam Brinkman, who wasn't even on call that day. He was working in the clinic. He was treating hernia patients and other scheduled people who were coming to see him. And he got the page that this had happened. And he mentioned to me that, you are wearing so many different hats in this moment, right? You're wanting to make sure that the emergency room is prepared. You're wanting to make sure that your colleagues are okay. But he also didn't get a whole lot of information in that page, so he wasn't sure what school it was and whether his own children were affected. So it just, to me, showed the amazing work that emergency doctors and first responders do in sort of compartmentalizing and making sure that they are doing this incredible work for our community while also still being human and still having very normal human feelings about this. And then finally, I was able to connect with Dr. Nick Coinel, who is the vice chair of operations for the Department of Emergency Medicine at UW Health. And he was among the first people to talk to the families of 2 of the most gravely wounded students, Sammy and River. And all of these doctors have their own children. And Nick told me that he approached those conversations with the parents thinking about what information he would want to hear as a parent in that moment. And that was really moving to me. Just hearing sort of the thought process behind all of this and the ways that these doctors really immediately kicked into gear and saved lives, especially knowing the gravity of the injuries that these two students had and that both of their lives were saved. Just shows the incredible work that I think the community knows maybe on the surface, but not to the level of detail that I feel like I was able to share in this story.
Yeah, I don't think people think about it very often. And to be able to know, pulling back the lens a little bit, like the humanity that was centered, and while they also have to get their job done, incredibly detailed precision, thoughtfulness, and the responsibility that they bear in terms of communicating what happened while, those people's children had critical injuries. I understand UW Health is also home to one of 2 level 1 pediatric trauma centers in Wisconsin. So this is a space for that. And so I was glad to be able to read the story and get a little bit more context, even though it's so heavy. It's such a human story. There is some good news here. The 2 critically injured students, Sammy Garduno Martinez and River Clardy, have both made huge steps towards recovery, like that, holding that in the front here. After spending 6 weeks in the hospital, River was discharged on January 30th. And just this past October, Sammy moved to a rehabilitation facility in Illinois. So, there's still a long road ahead, and there's a GoFundMe that has been set up to support. Erin G., you had a recent story come out detailing that in the aftermath of the shooting, the United Way of Dane County set up a recovery fund and raised $621,000 for impacted families at the school. Can you tell us a little bit about how that money is being used?
So in that story, we were looking at trying to understand, there was this massive community response immediately after the shooting. Like you said, United Way had raised all this money. And we had heard, through our reporting that one family, Sammy's family in particular, they are still in conversations with the school. They have received a small amount of money from the school, according to the family's attorney, but they're still in discussions to receive more funds. And that family's attorney told us the biggest takeaway for him in working with the family is that there just isn't enough funds in general or financial assistance to support families who have endured gun violence and violence in our schools, and that the family needs a lot more financial assistance than what they have been able to receive so far. And, that leads to the GoFundMe. Right now, their most significant financial needs, as they've stated in their own GoFundMe, is finding accessible transportation for Sammy and his long-term needs, finding new housing as well. And these are all just costs that I think, reflecting 1 year later, these are the types of things where I think, you're in the immediate aftermath and there's medical bills and all those costs continue, but there's all these other costs and things that these families are still facing and navigating at this time.
Yeah, the long-term recovery and disability. And it's pretty heavy, but it's also something seeing folks wanting to come forward and be in community and help support is heartening. We'll link to that GoFundMe that's up for Sammy's recovery in our show notes for sure. I do want to talk a bit about the faith community. And Erin Gretzinger, you're reporting there. This was a Christian school, and Sammy was very involved with the Lighthouse Church. And its congregation is home to many ALCS families and alumni. Erin, your recent story touches on the faith community in depth. How have local faith leaders in our community navigated this tragedy?
So the story that we put out about Lighthouse Church tries to get at this question of how the faith community has navigated this moment. And for Lighthouse, like you mentioned, they had, more than a dozen students at Abundant Life at the time of the shooting, including Sammy, who we've talked about. And it has just been a year full of a lot of emotions, was the sense I got from talking with the pastors at Lighthouse, that they've really felt their feelings as faith leaders, as parents themselves, and as school administrators. Lighthouse has its own Christian school, which feeds into Abundant Life. That's why some of those students go there, is that the Lighthouse school only goes through 8th grade. So they see some of their students move on to Abundant Life. So they really felt all these mixed emotions and feelings as they're trying to grapple with. I think, as one pastor put it, both the parents and adults were, they have faith. They believe in God. They believe God is good. And yet you have to grapple with this terrible thing that's happened. And with young kids being involved, that's just something that weighs heavily on anyone, and especially on this community with such close ties to Abundant Life. I think their story just really encapsulates that tension, and how do we sit with that, and how do we navigate that as people with our beliefs and with, those who we love.
Did they offer or share any advice that they've been giving to the greater community on how to heal, or possible considerations around forgiveness, or, navigating this moment for the rest of us?
In speaking with the pastors, I think there was also this overwhelming sense of hope and faith that even in these, darker moments that their community was facing, and sort of the tests that brought on for them, they really did feel very supported by the Madison Christian community, who they said really rallied in the wake of this. That one pastor told me sort of a Thanksgiving feast this year drew almost twice as many churches, and she attributes that to sort of this moment after Abundant Life and realizing our differences aren't so big after all in the wake of this. And I think they felt that was also really captured in the broader Madison community, that sense of hope and faith. And I think that was captured from all the people in the Culver's lines last year when Culver's was doing a fundraiser for the school, or when Sammy's family's GoFundMe went up and they saw donations pour in this fall, and just all the prayers and, social media posts. Whether people had faith or not, they felt like this was something that people really came together around in the community, even when things can feel divisive, and this could feel like a moment that could tear people apart. As one pastor put it to me, that she doesn't feel like the 1-year mark of the shooting is going to be that. She feels like there's more unity in the community, more togetherness reflected. And I think that would be my biggest takeaway as people are thinking about this, and about how people really directly touched by this have navigated this past year and are trying to still work through these next few weeks.
And obviously, grief is such a universal thing that is also navigated in so many different ways. Lots of people obviously lean on faith. And, for those who do not lean in that direction, or they want political change, let's just say, like they think that our systems are failing kids. Erin McGroarty, you cover the state house, and you've been doing that for some time. You hear things, people wanting action legislatively. Have you seen anything policy-wise in response to the ALCS shooting, or is anything in the works? Because this is clearly something, it happened at ALCS, and, there have been so many school shootings across the board. Has anything come down the pike or is in consideration at the State House?
So I did connect with state lawmakers in the Wisconsin legislature in the months that followed, and it resulted in not a lot of tangible action. A lot of lawmakers wanted to see policy enacted to, put in place red flag laws or universal background checks or things like that. But the legislature is pretty starkly divided, and that action didn't take place. Our new state government reporter, Olivia Herkin, is in the process of connecting with state policymakers to see, 1 year away from this tragedy, what sort of discussions are happening in the state assembly and the state senate. What sort of action do lawmakers want to see? And is there any kind of compromise that can be found across these partisan divides? So she will have that story with her findings coming out in the coming weeks. And we'll just keep an eye on anything coming out of the legislature.
Well, this was obviously a horrible tragedy, and in some ways people might not want to talk about it. And why focus on this? Like, this is a painful thing. People are still healing. However, it is really important that we not forget. And so, obviously we on CityCast Madison have been appreciating your reporting and the stories that you're doing. We're going to link all of them in the show notes for folks who want to learn more about what we discussed. And before I let you go, both Erin McGroarty and Erin Gretzinger, if you could share, what do you hope people take away from your coverage for this series?
I think for me, what was most moving was being able to connect with the doctors and see the work that happens at our hospitals. Like you mentioned, Madison is home to one of only 2 level 1 pediatric trauma centers, the other being in Milwaukee. And you never want tragedies like this to happen anywhere. But the fact that Madison has the capability to treat these injuries, our community is extremely fortunate to have the medical professionals, the doctors, the nurses, all of the people that worked on these students and saved their lives. So that was absolutely the most moving part of the reporting that I did on this, was being able to hear the stories of those doctors.
I would echo that sentiment from reporting on Lighthouse Church and speaking with the pastors there and learning about their experiences from one pastor who had to talk about this with her own children and struggling to tell them she didn't know, why this was happening, and trying to have those conversations in her own household while also comforting those in the school and in the broader church community. And you're just grappling for answers. And I think a lot of us felt that way when this news first broke, and even still a year later reflecting on it, I think that remains a powerful sentiment. And I think it's important to hear these stories of community and how other people have processed and navigated this and how we're trying to continue to move forward and heal. Like you said, I think it's hard to talk about and it's a challenging thing to navigate. And as a community, I think overwhelmingly, the sense is that this did bring people together. And of course, there's still policy issues or other things that are always going to be talked about and will be for some time. But as we're reflecting on this, thinking about, I think those stories of people who helped, like the doctors and others directly connected, finding resilience, are powerful as well.
Well, appreciate you taking the time to talk about this very hard subject and for all of your reporting as shared. And, hearts go out to the Abundant Life Christian School and the people that were lost and our whole community as people reflect on this. If you made it through this conversation, thank you for listening. And thank you, Erin Gretzinger.
Thank you.
And Erin McGroarty. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
That's Erin McGroarty, health and policy reporter, and Erin Gretzinger, K-12 education reporter, both at the Cap Times. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you think this is important work, please consider being a neighbor. And if you value today's episode, why not share it with someone who cares about community healing? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care, take care of each other, and thanks for listening.